Welcome to this edition of Experts Speak. Today, we are honored and privileged to have Ambassador Gautam Mukhopadhaya to speak to us about various issues related to India and the neighborhood. Ambassador Mukhopadhaya has been India's ambassador to Syria, Afghanistan, and Myanmar. He has handled very delicate assignments, such as opening the Indian mission in Kabul. He has also worked in the United Nations headquarters in New York as a consultant on social development. He is currently a visiting senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research. He heads a task force at the CII on CLMV and is also a member of the Niti Forum. Ambassador Mukhopadhaya, in his long career, which he joined in the Foreign Service in 1980, has served in various capacities in Mexico, France, Cuba, Afghanistan, Syria, the UN mission in New York City, the Ministry of External Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Culture. He has a notable range of experience in his professional experience, which include media, culture, human rights, social development, defense and security, and of course, conventional political and diplomatic engagements. Welcome to this edition, Ambassador. We are really privileged and thank you for sharing your time today.
Welcome, pleasure to be here.
Sir, I would just like to start this conversation by requesting you to lay out before us as to, we are going through these extremely challenging times imposed by the pandemic. We have issues in the neighborhood. The whole world is entering a new normal. How do you see India in the larger picture of, I would say, the Eastern neighborhood in Asia? If you can lay out your thoughts on that in general.
Well, thank you, Sabya. It's a pleasure to be in your Expert Talk series. Obviously, COVID-19 has placed us in a very complex situation. Its first and immediate impact and effect is that, in a way, it has put a brake on every kind of activity that we were used to, let alone cross-border activities. So I think for the time being, at least until we manage to work out the protocols and also work out until it sort of plateaus and peaks, there are going to be several hindrances to normal interactions within the country and outside the country. However, I think we should also look at it from two other points of view. The fact is, in many ways, COVID-19 is a warning about the entire kind of unsustainable course of development, overproduction, overconsumption, very top-down, environmentally costly mode of development that we have had. And there is very much temptation to go back to business as usual. I mean, the idea is to get over the COVID-19 and go back to business as usual. And a lot of the strategies are really designed to see how quickly you can come back to business as usual. I think that would be a mistake, number one. Number two, there is a second approach, which is to look at the opportunities being thrown up by COVID-19. And I think that is actually a much more constructive area to look in, because the opportunities are immense. For one, it can be an opportunity to get back to nature or more sustainable modes of living, much more down to the grassroots. In fact, Prime Minister's call for going local and Atmanirbharta in some ways also pointing in the same direction. On the other hand, there is this entire new world of contactless technologies, digital contactless technologies, and the possibilities in contactless digital technologies that has been opened up. And the possibilities of that are immense, and we are just beginning to realize it. In fact, what we are beginning to realize is the fact that, in a way, dealing with the real world on an everyday basis for so many centuries had inhibited the possibilities of digital technologies so far. So now what has happened is you have a situation where circumstances have forced you to take recourse to digital technologies, and we are seeing the possibilities of that, immense possibilities of that. Just to give you an example, just the number of conferences like this or talks like this that we can organize has expanded much more than it used to be. That means the forum for debate, for discussion, for people to speak, for people to make their voice felt, for going deeper into subjects, all that has expanded. But it's many, many other areas. I mean, as we go into the interview, we will talk about the combination of local and digital that I think has opened up spaces that cross borders.
Thank you so much for that. Actually, it very much comes in line with what I was just going to ask you as my next question. We have a new education policy in India. It promises to be a paradigm shift in the way we approach education. And as a foreign services, with your vast experience in foreign services and diplomatic missions, and your developmental perspectives, especially I'll focus on, request you to focus on the northeastern region where we have many neighbors bordering us. How do you see this education policy evolving and enabling things like educational technology collaborations with our neighbors, fostering more contacts, creating a workforce so that our Act East becomes more vibrant in the coming years? Your comments and thoughts on that.
Right. So again, there are aspects to the new education policy. On the whole, it's a very positive development in many directions. For one, I think it gives the opportunity to make our education much more relevant to local circumstances. So this is a great opportunity. It also opens up the possibilities of collaboration, foreign partnerships, which is much needed. So I think from these 2 points of view, it is very good. It's designed much more to allow people to find their own level, to find their own interests, a little more flexible. So there are a great many positives that come with the new education policy that I think are very favorable. There are areas that, of course, that are always debatable, some that may be controversial, but I think those don't necessarily impact on the positive features that are existing there. So this is, absolutely a net sum positive. Secondly, there are going to be opportunities. I mentioned about digital technologies. So obviously, education is one area. This particularly, the bridging of space through technology, that is going to be greatly assisted. So it's going to be possible to bring technologies and education and training and skills much closer to where we are. And I think that's the point. The point is that everything should now enable us to come back to our, our comfort levels, as well as be able to connect, outside with the outside world. The outside world can be within the region, within the Northeast. It can be beyond the Northeast as well. And it can be with the larger country, and it can also be with the international community. So I think, and one of the things that people are discovering with this COVID-19 is that as people are forced to stay at home and work at home, they're also discovering that it is possible to cut down on costs and to bring down price points for education. And we had a very interesting example being quoted by AppTech of their centers for training in Australia, where they don't need to acquire property, they don't need to hire Australian staff. They are capable of doing the same from India and bring down price points quite considerably. Now, just imagine what could be done with that same idea, let's say with Myanmar, with Bangladesh, with Bhutan, with Nepal, with even Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand. The possibilities are immense. I mean, there will always be some challenges. For example, if you want to teach in Myanmar, you may need to be able to get people from Myanmar over. But, there are tremendous opportunities, both provided by the new education policy, as well as by the new technologies. We should explore that.
Yes, yes. Against that backdrop, I'd like to ask you, in the northeastern region, we have five neighbors. The northern neighbor, we have high mountains, China. So if we even, think of that as the other side of the Himalayas, and if we just look at the southern side of the Himalayas, so we have a unique mountain to sea ecosystem. The southern ranges of the Himalayas and the rivers, and it's all connects the region. We've heard you speak on this at several fora. Um, and in that context, agriculture and water management would be a key component for the development. Recently, many state governments have also been working on new agri policies and water policies, increasing production of the farm sector, etc. I know that you have in an immense interest and thought leadership on this subject. Um, can you talk a little bit about how you see this sector, these sectors of water, agriculture, generating livelihood and collaboration between our immediate neighbors in this context? Can we think of some transboundary value chains? How do you see this whole evolution and the gaps in it?
So in the long run, we just have to go about that way. You see, the reality is that geographically, the entire Indo-Gangetic Brahmaputra plain that effectively makes up the subcontinent is one geographic unit. You are bounded on one side by the mountains. All the river systems from the Indus to the Brahmaputra originate in that and eventually disgorge either in the Arabian Sea or the Bay of Bengal. So in many ways, we are united by that. And naturally, economies, local economies, regional economies also follow in many ways the drainage system, the topography, the geography of that region. And that has been historically the case. Now, there have always been, of course, political units, political boundaries. And what we have seen is an aggravation of those political boundaries post-partition and post-imperialism. In fact, if I can sort of just step back a little, let's say if we can think of this whole area, firstly, geographically, geopolitically, because in some sense it's one security unit. We can think of it then as an economic unit. We can think of it as what is the word for it? In terms of hydrological unit. So that it is one unit in many ways. All right, you could make a separation between the Deccan and the plains, but on the whole, it is one unit. But if you go back historically, let's say pre-colonial times, there was a certain kind of political economy. We need not go into it. During the colonial period, there was an entirely new political economy, a political economy that was meant to serve the ends of colonialism and, frankly, British colonial interests. And it was British colonial interests that brought this area into a particular kind of economic unit, an economic unit that was meant to serve the outside world through tea, timber, rice, oil and gas. The fundamentals of that economy, in fact, continue in the post-independence, post-colonial system. And we have not been able to yet recreate a kind of economic system that is based on local livelihoods, local occupations, local skills, local properties, local genius, and also local products. There are many local products that simply have not been developed because of this, what we can call larger plantation economy that has been brought with this kind of neo-colonial model. So we need to go down a way in which, well, political frontiers are what they are. We have to live with them. But as ex-Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said in a memorable phrase, we have to make them less and less relevant. We have to, in a way, trump the political frontiers. And I'm not saying divisions, I'm saying frontiers, because frontiers can be bridged. We have to trump the political frontiers with economic activity anchored and embedded in the life of people, so that the local people, wherever they are, don't feel boundaries as obstructions to their livelihood. And I think that's the way that we should be aiming to go. And I think, again, technologies will help us. And again, once again, I want to give an example of an Australian firm that I was reading about that has developed a kind of new, let's say, technology for hydration, rehydration, hydrating agricultural products, which in effect takes out the water from the agricultural product, makes it much lighter, makes it much more transportable. That water then can be used for drinking, can be used for remineralizing, let's say, RO water, which loses its mineral properties. But it can also be used up the value chain for batteries and for, other purposes. So in a way, you're utilizing, and this can be done, meaning now they have evolved modules where installation can be done online, or at least the instructions can be given online and these things can be. So in a way, there are possibilities for overcoming those political boundaries and permitting much more seamless economic activity across borders. And those borders, sometimes mountains and big rivers can act as, of course, both mediums of communication, but they can also act as obstacles or at least hurdles that you have to cross over. With this kind of possibility, in fact, that is minimized. And all this can be combined with much more eco-friendly energy sources, much more decentralized forms of production and transport and connectivity in general. So, I think if we look at the combination of local and digital, there are tremendous opportunities for us to exploit there. In many ways, COVID-19 has woken us up from possibilities that we were not utilizing because of the easy availability of ways of doing business as usual, if you refer to me, I know. So if I refer to the phrase in a different sense. So I think there are tremendous possibilities, and we should train our thinking to accept that, look, there are going to be risks to business as usual. And how do we minimize these risks, and how do we capitalize on new technologies to be able to minimize that risk?
Yeah, thank you. And, you set the stage for something I had in mind long, and I think our viewers also. We've been hearing a lot of movements across, trade and connectivity recently for neighbors like Bangladesh, for example. A lot has happened, moved forward. We recently had a consignment which was transshipped via Chittagong to Tripura, so new things are happening. And as you said, with local production and technology, more things can happen. Yesterday, I received a request for some AI collaboration from Bangladesh. But we don't hear too much from Myanmar. And you've served in Myanmar, you know the country so well. And I want to take this opportunity to ask you, how do you see India-Myanmar relations, especially from the perspective of the northeastern region of India and the northwestern region of Myanmar, the northern region of Myanmar, coming together in collaboration on the ideas that you spoke about? We share a common landscape, we share shared waters, there's so many cultural similarities. How do you see things moving, and what can be done to move ahead from your vast experience and knowledge of Myanmar and the region?
Thank you, Sabia. Please don't exaggerate my experience and knowledge. It is like any other person. May I just, before I come back to this question, may I just touch on one aspect that I missed out in talking about the new education policy? One very important thing is, in many ways, our kind of education has divorced us from real life, and also very much from the life around us, from the call it the ethnographic life around us, ethnobotany, even so many other aspects. So I think the new education policy also gives you an opportunity to reacquaint yourself from your own surroundings. In other words, such important things like awareness and knowledge of trees. If if only, and the traditional knowledge that goes with the uses of trees and the conservation of trees, because that would also give a fillip, for example, to the movement for, a more green environment, for more afforestation, for more natural spaces, for rewilding, or wilding and rewilding. So even just from that point of view, going local has tremendous, tremendous yields from that point of view. Now, to come to your question on Myanmar, Myanmar may look as though it's a little behind the times in terms of the kind of connectivity that you're talking about, and you gave the example of Bangladesh. I think there are 2-3 differences and also 2-3 possibilities. The differences are this. You see, Bangladesh is very much part of this geographic unit geo-economic unit, let's call it, that I talked about. People don't realize, in fact, the Patkai range of mountains, Arakan, were a fairly formidable barrier to communication historically. Of course, there were always transit routes and trade routes and migration and some economic activity always took place. But let us recognize that the easternmost extremities of India and the western sections of Myanmar were relatively remote and sparsely populated, and they were not very driving sort of economic centers. The economic centers were further down on the Brahmaputra on this side and further down on the Irrawaddy on that side. But post the liberalization, starting from around 2010-11, internet penetration, mobile penetration in Myanmar has been extraordinary. So the country today is much more digitally connected, is in fact extremely highly digitally connected. And many other countries, if you go down to Thailand, Vietnam, there are very high levels of particularly mobile connectivity, if not always internet connectivity. And it's a matter of time that these, particularly I think with the kind of developments that we have seen as broadband and all that fiber optics expands, I think it's a matter of time that all this will happen. Now, another very untapped area is, and I keep saying this and I keep saying this about the Northeast, and these are common features for this entire region, is that in fact, the agri-rural sector of agriculture, horticulture, fisheries, forest products, and animal husbandry, which is the livelihood for 75%, or at least the base of the livelihood for 75% of the people of the region, from Eastern India up to Vietnam. In our kind of industrialization, in our kind of model of development, we have emphasized a lot more, secondary and tertiary industries. And to a certain extent, we have neglected the processing of primary products on which the livelihoods of 75% remain. So I think one of the things is simply setting up SME links, tapping the rural produce and the rural skills and the rural potential of these areas which have been neglected. And if you did this, then the rural regions of these countries would also be not only much more productive, but also much more viable. And of course, we have to see that this develops in an environmental friendly way, not in an environmentally costly way. So there has to be a simultaneous. But I'm saying that respect for trees and respect for agriculture don't have to go out of sync. It is possible to have jhum cultivation and have much more and better forests and have better forest produced and agricultural produce. I think this is possible. But it's a question of being able to tap and also expand the potential of these rural areas for productivity, and to be able to use connectivity to be able to tap that productivity. Typically, we tend to think of connectivity as a kind of panacea. Once we provide the roads and we provide the rail and we provide the connectivity, everything will happen. But I think that kind of development also tends to be much more uneven. And also then we are left with the problem of the last mile. Actually, we need to begin from the first mile. There are already sufficient infrastructure and network of connectivity. I think one of the most important things is to be able to get the first mile produce to the roads. And then those networks ought to develop organically. I mean, all produce eventually find their way to local markets, from local markets to regional hubs, from regional hubs to wider markets. So the local markets and regional hubs provide excellent centers, and market towns provide the excellent centers for processing the produce of the rural hinterland. And that will lead to a much more broad-based development, much more equitable spread of income and earnings and opportunities, rural employment, as well as entrepreneurship. And those products, also will contribute to the diversity of what people eat and consume. What is in fact happening is exactly the opposite. We are losing the biodiversity even of the agricultural products that we have had, because certain seeds become monopolies, and then they become uniformly planted. And farmers, and there's a lot being written about the loss of biodiversity in agriculture.
Yes.
I was hearing about 400 varieties of tomatoes. Where do you see 400 varieties of tomatoes? This was a period when farmers saved their own seeds, and therefore it was possible to have that kind of diversity. So I think all this is possible today, and whether we are talking about Myanmar or Laos or Cambodia or Vietnam or the Northeast or Bangladesh or Bengal, Eastern India, all of these areas, I think in many ways, traditional products and the uses of traditional products to larger markets has just not been exploited. What was champagne? Yeah. Champagne was a local drink in Champagne district, France. That has made it into a global product. There's no reason why any number of products from every region, that's the richness of the tradition and culture, should not be able to get wider markets. I don't say everything will be champagne, but there is tremendous, and I think it is that latent potential that we have not looked at, particularly by this kind of plantation economy, which tends to overpower. So then suddenly one fine day you will decide that you want rubber or you want tea, and it will kill a lot of agriculture that existed in that area, with other consequences and so on. In many ways, it's good that in tea we are going back a little more and more towards small farmers and small production, and this will also introduce much greater variety and qualities and so on. But yes, your question started off from Myanmar. So Myanmar has tremendous possibilities. The immediate regions across the boundary from here are very rich in rice varieties. Of course, we know that Myanmar is a major producer of beans and pulses, especially for the Indian market. But there are a number of oil seeds, there are fruits, there are fish from the Irrawaddy River. There are, now coffee is being grown. Tea is consumed in a very different way in Myanmar. You're aware of the typical, the pickled tea dishes. And we don't even know about that. Green tea and many other varieties of tea. This was the region between Yunnan, the northeast of India, Laos, Vietnam. In many ways, a region that is united by the migration of the Thai peoples from southern China, is also the region where tea took root. And even today, in some of those areas, it's possible to find tea trees that are hundreds of years old, that grew naturally. So it's all this richness that has not been tapped by this mega forms of development, which tend to standardize and uniformize, that we need to regenerate.
Yes. How do you see us breaking this this cycle of, if I may call it? How do we make that shift to?
I think the day we, actually that shift has been there. We have bypassed it. If you think of the Amul model of development.
Yeah.
In effect, what was it? It was tapping, in that case, it was tapping the small cattle, the small cattle owner, And and what it did was it gave it scale. Uh, it um, it tapped the market. It provided technology. It provided an outlet, access, inputs, technical and technological inputs, and then it was able to create a space that was then amenable to more corporate discipline, more corporate scale, and more corporate strategies and techniques and marketing and transport and the likes of it. Somewhere along the line, we've got into a hurry to develop, and we just want to do things very fast. And because we want to do things very fast, we tend to go in for big solutions, big capital, big land holdings. That means you actually deprive people of their small hand holdings in order to be able to, and actually remove them from their livelihoods. Whereas in fact, what you need to do is to make their livelihoods more sustainable and more profitable, and it can be done.
Yeah.
There will always be winners and losers, but it can be done. In other words, things can be done with much less social and economic and demographic disruption, where it should not be so. I mean, there will always be scope for migration. There will always be scope for employment outside. There'll be certain employments that will be better rewarded outside. But there is not the need for such major disruptions where whole populations move away from the villages to the cities, and then a COVID-19 takes place, and they all come back, and they actually bring back the pandemic to areas that were unaffected. You understand my point? There is a much better and possible balance between the local and the regional and the international and also the global. There will always be some issues that are global, and I'm not at all saying local is at the expense of everything else. But I think the form of development that we have taken so far has deprived the local and privileged the big. And so I think, how do we do it? I think if we realize that we missed the turn at some point, and realize it in a political sense, and also realize it in an economic sense, to realize that there is money, there is earnings, there are profits to be made at the bottom of the pyramid. And I'm not using it in the way that C.K. Prahlad used it, but I'm using it the bottom of the pyramid. I mean the 75% that lives off land, water, and sun, and forests. And that if you can realize that and then see the potential behind that. I hope I'm not speaking too much, but let me just give you an example. You go to a village, and let's say the whole village essentially lives off what nowadays. Okay, if it's a rice growing village, they wait for the rice season, they plant rice, they live off the rice, it provides their food security. And the rest of the time they do odd jobs or look for government jobs or a little bit of trading, a little bit of transport. Some local products are commercialized in a small way. Let's say bamboo is used for local uses, and some local vegetables and others are used for local purposes. But there is tremendous scope in utilizing that bamboo sustainably for larger markets in much more creative ways. There's much more scope for dozens of varieties of horticulture and agricultural products that can be processed. Pickling, to give an example, or I mean, okay, this may not be a great example for the dry states, but local varieties of wines that used to be traditional. These are all can be, I mean, they have unfortunately become social ills, but they can also be positive livelihood products.
Absolutely.
Right? And I'm not saying that we should only stick to the past. I mean, you are in Meghalaya. I want to give an example. Meghalaya, and I hope that somebody, Meghalaya has one of the most enlightened administrations that I've seen in the Northeast, and they are doing tremendous things. But for example, I've always been struck why the Meghalaya economy is so dependent on extractive sector, things like limestone and coal and stone quarrying, which create problems down the line, and its pristine rivers are affected. And why not, for example, those lovely meadows be used for dairy farming? It is almost ideal dairy farming terrain. And yet we have never heard of Meghalaya being developed as a dairy center for India. So, even in terms of new avenues, there are avenues that we have not explored.
Absolutely. And on that, like, there's a new bamboo park that's come up in Assam, as you know.
Yeah, I've been seeing not only one. I've been seeing several. Uh,
Yeah.
yes.
There's a new mega bamboo park come up in Assam.
Which place exactly?
Uh, Dhemaji.
Dhemaji. Okay, right.
Um,
I think I've seen it. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
It was announced by the Prime Minister a few
Hmm.
weeks back, I think almost.
Okay,
Not
so
very,
this is a brand new one. All right.
yes, yes, yes. My question is that, do such parks really serve the purpose, or as you said, it should be more decentralized and, kind of empower.
Well, the National Bamboo Mission or its new version is also trying to, spread laterally and horizontally. Uh, Parks serve a purpose in the sense that, look, then everybody does not need to have a property where they set up a factory, and the parks provide the machinery that can be simply used by anyone with a creative idea.
Right.
Um, I hesitate to comment more on this because I don't know
Sure.
enough.
Sure.
I think it is and in many ways, these ideas have also been derived and drawn. I mean, people have gone to places like Taiwan and China, where the bamboo industry is thriving and prospering, and they have brought these ideas in many ways from them, and they have worked there. And we need to look into, rather than dismiss it, we need to look into the possibility. What is it that is making it not work somewhere,
Hmm.
or making it work somewhere?
Right.
Not everything is bad just because it hasn't yet worked.
Sure.
Maybe there are problems that you need to
Sure.
look at and rectify.
Sure.
But there's no one size solution. You need bamboo parks, but
Yes.
you also need much more decentralized and local processing. For one, take the simple idea of bamboo treatment. It doesn't make sense to bring bamboo hundreds of kilometers to treat it at some distant place, right? Uh, you should have bamboo treatment centers so that the bamboo lasts much longer, much closer. And of course, there are many traditional ways of treating bamboo also, which make it last longer, which should be exploited. And then when you do that, there are many bamboo experts who can tell you what you can do. Bamboo, like coconut in Kerala, is best exploited if you exploit the entire chain of utilization.
Yes.
From use for high technology products or inputs to high technology products, to waste bamboo, bamboo sawdust, that can be used for, or modules that can waste bamboo that can be used for activated charcoal and so on. So there is a whole range of things.
Yes.
And obviously bamboo will be most economical and most viable if we can use the whole bamboo, not just parts.
Right.
So in places like Vietnam, for example, they reduce transportation costs by not transporting whole bamboos. That, depending on the use that bamboo is going to be made of, it can be cut into smaller sizes, closer to the source, so that you save on transportation costs, and that makes the industry that much more viable. So, I'm sorry, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just giving but illustrative examples. But I think the examples are there. They are there, and they are there in the Northeast. There are lots of people in the Northeast who are doing very good work. There are the bamboo centers for bamboo technology and cane that are doing good work. What is not happening is, the failure has been on the extension. Much greater effort needs to be made on extension. The knowledge is there that technologies are being developed, but the transfer from the centers to the producers. Mizoram has some very good examples that are coming up of a bamboo park that are being used in modern ways, and even to make products and supply products to IKEA, for example. In Tripura, you have a private sector investment that is making bamboo wood and bamboo board that is being used more like wood, less like bamboo, but it has the properties of bamboo, so it is positive. I think, give bamboo 5 years, and I think we'll see that industry really develop.
Yeah, on that note, I wanted to ask you my last question, which is it seems that there is a need for the right narratives to be uh, to be coming up and highlighted at all levels. And an organization, the one I represent here, the Asian Confluence, for example, operates in what we call the third space, which is basically the space of ideas, of out of the box thinking, consulting people from all spheres of life, including the first two spaces, government and industry, but kind of not having any immediate limitations as is there sometimes in government, in the diplomatic domain, or in the business community, which is immediate, needs some immediate business benefits, and to build the right narratives. Um, what do you think that, you know, organizations like us and the third space in general, if we can use this word, um, uh, do in these current times when out of the box thinking is required? COVID has, as you said, given us a great opportunity to think out of the box. Um, what can we do to foster better growth, bottom up, and better regional integration, not integration, regional cooperation between the states and between the northeastern region or the eastern part of India and the extended east, all the way, as you
Yeah.
said, from till Vietnam. you know.
Well, okay. So look, each of these spaces, the government space, the business space, and the third space, as you call it, have their advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, the third space may have the advantage of, being just much more flexible and free and anarchic, if you like, and go all over the place. But it has much greater limitations when it comes to capital investment or even implementation. Government has the single largest machinery for implementation, and it has the single largest machinery for capital, the budget for capital. Industry has, I suppose, the innovation, the entrepreneurship, has some amount of capital, but is limited by immediate markets, profitability. And there are many businesses that cannot sustain themselves long enough for something to work out. Which is why I find the Amul model a very interesting model, because not even the capital that is required is that great. It's more use of management, to be able to act as a kind of multiplying factor. And the third space has its advantages. Now, I think in particular, the third space, combined with what I talked to you about the leapfrogging opportunities that are provided by digital technology. And I think not just gates, it's the floodgates that have been opened by COVID-19 for this kind of, it's the kind of a look at the future, that has been thrown up. Which is why I'm, really, when we talk about business as usual or normalization, I would like really to be a new normal, not to be but a much more green, much more low carbon, much more sustainable, much more broad-based, much more livelihood-centered, much more focused on from the bottom up. And I always come back to this phrase, people who live off the land, water, and the sun, because everything else that we do is based on what they do. And unless we do something to expand their opportunities and not make them feel that they are disadvantaged, and make them much more viable. This has been done all over the developed world. Look, the Europeans protect their agriculture market. The Americans promote their agricultural industry. The Japanese protect their agricultural market. In places like Thailand, they have learned how to build an economy based on their agricultural market. So I think this has to be done. I mean, we need to accept that the agri-rural sector is the bedrock of our economy. Industry, education, services, tourism, whatever you have that we talk about the most typically uh, uh, builds on that. Let me also say that, let's say, you can look at this world in terms of the interests of the producers, and that the producers can be both agricultural and industrial, the consumers and the traders. The voice of the trader, the voice of the consumer, and sometimes to some extent the voice of the industrial producer is much larger than the voice of the rural producer. And and very often the traders and the consumers tend to dominate, and the industrial producers tend to dominate over the others. So what I'm trying to say is that we have an opportunity, and in a way, the very fact that the Northeast has not yet been totally caught up in this kind of reckless overconsumption model of development that the rest of the world, or the developed world, and also rest of India is going on to, this is the perfect opportunity to be able to do this. In some ways, automatically, some of this is happening. And you can always see green shoots of this variety in the Northeast. And there is an awareness also of this in the Northeast. I'm not saying something that is, rocket new. But I think we need to give a political priority to this. And I think we need to get our political parties and also our chief ministers and others to realize the goal at the bottom of the pyramid. And, not look for these mega projects, which are mega contracts, which are, frankly, money-making machines for a cream at the top. I'm not saying they don't bring benefits, but the benefits are not well utilized. I mean, overall, if I had to do a cost benefit, I would say that you would get much more if you invested at the bottom of the pyramid than the top of the pyramid. And I think one of the problems is that in this bid to catch up, because you want to show development and you want to show development quickly, you tend to rely on those who are most capacitated and the most, the ones who have the largest outfits and the largest capital and the largest organization and the largest machinery. You tend to rely on them. Well, yes, it may give you rewards in the short run, but I'm not sure it would give you rewards in the long run.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I think that was very inspiring. And
so, the third space has this opportunity because of this borderless, because the third now, especially with new technologies, the third space can capitalize on the borderless technologies. Yes. And frankly, if you look at it, China did that, with its apps. And now that space has been opened up for other political reasons, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us to fill that space. It's not that that space is away from us. So I would say that, to the extent that third space can also link up with startups.
Yes.
The new ideas that come from the third space are then translated into startups. Yes. I think this, and taking advantage of the new possibilities that are coming up. Yeah, I think it could be a driving force, particularly for the Northeast, because it has a young population, creative, talented, cosmopolitan, even as they are rooted, English language speaking, which helps them outside, and they have their ethnic ties and, across the border. So I think there's a great scope for the Northeast. In fact, I would say that this is a great opportunity for the Northeast. But one thing that the third state needs to do is that we talk a lot about cross-border. We have done nothing to bring the Northeast together. The Northeast is 8 separate states.
Yes.
Yeah. And, so we talk big when we talk about Bangladesh and Myanmar and Tibet and so on. We have simply not done enough to bring the Northeast together as an entity. And I would say that should be the starting point of what we should be doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ambassador. And you've always enriched the Asian confluence from its very inception. I remember you were the one of the speakers when you were ambassador in Myanmar. You visited Shillong, and was part of, spoke at our first third space dialogue. And since then, you've always inspired us with your ideas and your guidance. And I think we look forward to, to more of that, and to working with you so that this vision can be realized, at least, and the role that we can play, and get others to participate. So on that note, again, a very sincere thank you from all of us for sharing your time, and look forward to further talking and engaging on these points.
My pleasure, and thank you for remembering that. In fact, I think if I remember right, that was the occasion we talked about the riverine vision.
Yes.
But of course, that's my pleasure to be able to throw up some ideas. Thank you.